Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean. Tell me, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it there? I'd love to know. Share it in the comments along with how you liked the story. I reply to every single one of you. Now let's step into the mystery. In the icy shadows of St. Petersburg, 1912, a scream shatters the opulent Petrov estate. Count Ivan lies dead, a jeweled dagger in his chest, a priceless Fabergé egg vanished. Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster from St. Mary Mead, whose keen eye unravels a web of love, betrayal, and hidden poison. As Snowberry's secrets and false clues point to a thief, only she can uncover the chilling truth before another falls. Will you follow the trail? Chapter 1. The Arrival in the Winter Palace. The Orient Express rattled to a halt at the Finland station amid a whirlwind of steam and snow, disgorging passengers into the frozen embrace of St. Petersburg. It was the 13th of February 1912, and the city sprawled like a glittering ice palace under a leaden sky, its canals locked in crystalline silence, and the golden domes of its cathedrals piercing the perpetual twilight. Miss Jane Marple, that unassuming spinster from the quiet English village of St. Mary Mead, clutched her carpet-bag and adjusted her sensible hat against the Siberian gusts that clawed at her skirts. She had travelled far on the strength of a single letter from her old school friend, Lady Evelyn Hargreaves, now Countess Petrovna, who promised a respite from the damp winters of home. "Come thaw your bones in our Russian hearth," Evelyn had written, her elegant script betraying a hint of urgency. But Miss Marple, with her lifetime of observing the subtle undercurrents in human affairs, sensed more than mere hospitality. Invitations like this often masked troubles, much like the way Mrs. Bantry's garden parties hid marital spats behind cucumber sandwiches. A sleigh awaited her, its bells jingling merrily as the driver, a burly moujik bundled in furs, cracked his whip and urged the horses through the drifts. The journey to the Petrov estate on the city's outskirts wound past grand boulevards lined with palaces, where gas lamps flickered like wary eyes in the gloom. Miss Marple peered out, noting the clusters of workers huddled in doorways, their faces etched with the harsh lines of discontent. Whispers of strikes and revolutionary fervour had reached even her remote corner of England. Here they seemed to echo in the very crunch of snow under hoof. The estate loomed at last, a sprawling manor of pale stone, its windows aglow with candlelight, flanked by vast gardens now buried under a pristine white shroud. Lady Evelyn greeted her at the door, her once vivacious features drawn tight with fatigue, though she enveloped Miss Marple in a warm embrace. "Jane, darling, how brave of you to venture into this frozen wilderness. Come in before you turn into an icicle." Evelyn's voice carried the polished lilt of London society, but her eyes darted nervously toward the shadowed halls beyond. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax and samovar tea, the walls adorned with gilt-framed portraits of stern ancestors glaring down like judges. Evelyn led her to the drawing-room, where a roaring fire crackled in the immense hearth, casting dancing shadows on Persian rugs and crystal decanters. "Allow me to introduce our little gathering," Evelyn said, her smile a touch too bright. First came her husband, Count Ivan Petrov, a towering figure with a bristling moustache and piercing blue eyes that assessed Miss Marple as one might a potential adversary at chess. He bowed stiffly, his voice a deep rumble, laced with a heavy accent. "Welcome, Miss Marple. My wife speaks highly of your discernment." There was a pause, as if he weighed the word carefully, before he turned away to pour a glass of vodka. Beside him stood his sister, Olga Petrovna, a widow of sharp angles and sharper tongue, her black morning gown dripping with emeralds that caught the firelight like trapped stars. She nodded curtly, her lips thinning into a line. An English visitor in February. You must have a constitution of iron, or perhaps a taste for drama. Her laugh was brittle, echoing faintly in the high-ceilinged room. The other guests formed a curious tableau around the fire. Dr. Sergei Volkov, a lean physician with wire-rimmed spectacles and a mane of unruly dark hair, extended a hand that trembled ever so slightly. "A pleasure, madam. I trust the journey wasn't too taxing. These rails can shake the soul from one's body." His eyes held a fervent gleam, the sort Miss Marple had seen in young vicars preaching reform back home. Then there was Natalia Kuznetsova, the Count's ward, a slip of a girl barely out of her teens, with porcelain skin and raven hair that framed wide, haunted eyes. She curtsied gracefully, but her fingers twisted in her shawl, betraying inner turmoil. "I'm so glad you've come," she murmured, her voice soft as falling snow. "Aunt Evelyn says you're wise beyond measure." Last was Mr. Harold Beaumont, a ruddy-faced Englishman in a tweed suit that strained at the seams, his jovial grin not quite reaching his shrewd eyes. "Fellow countryman, woman, splendid. I'm here on business, you know. Siberian furs, finest in the world. But enough shop talk. Let's thaw with some tea." He clapped his hands together, but Miss Marple noted the way his gaze flicked toward Natalia, lingering a fraction too long. Dinner was served in the grand dining hall, under chandeliers that tinkled like distant sleigh bells. The table groaned with zakouski, caviar on blini, pickled herring, and bowls of borscht steaming in the chill air. Conversation flowed uneasily, laced with the undercurrents of a world on the brink. Count Ivan dominated, his fist thumping the table as he decried the growing unrest in the factories. "These Bolshevik agitators are vermin. They stir the peasants like mud in a river." Dr. Volkov leaned forward, his fork poised like a weapon. "With respect, Count, the workers starve while you feast on caviar. Reform is inevitable, perhaps even revolution." The air crackled with tension, Olga smirking into her wineglass, Natalia paling, and Beaumont steering the talk to safer waters with tales of his fur expeditions. Evelyn shot Miss Marple a pleading glance, as if to say, "See what I endure?" Miss Marple said little, content to observe. She recalled a similar dinner in St. Mary Mead, where the Colonel's bluster hid embezzlement at the cricket club. People revealed themselves in such moments, the twitch of a lip, the avoidance of eyes. As the meal ended and the party retired, she climbed the creaking stairs to her room, a cosy chamber overlooking the snow-swept gardens. The bed was piled high with eiderdowns, and she sank into it with a sigh, knitting needles clicking softly as she pondered the evening's mosaic of motives. But sleep eluded her, as it often did in unfamiliar beds. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the panes. Then, in the dead of night, a piercing scream shattered the silence, followed by the thud of running feet. Miss Marple rose swiftly, wrapping her shawl about her shoulders, and hurried down the corridor. The household converged in the drawing-room, faces ghostly in the lamplight. There, sprawled on the blood-soaked rug, lay Count Ivan, a jewelled dagger buried hilt deep in his chest. Crimson stained the snow that had drifted through an open window, forming grotesque patterns like spilled ink. Evelyn stifled a sob. Olga clutched her pearls. Volkov knelt to check for a pulse, finding none. Natalia swayed, Beaumont supporting her with a muttered oath. "An intruder!" Olga hissed. "Look, The Fabergé egg from the mantel gone!" Indeed, the priceless ornament was missing, its velvet stand askew. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned the scene. The window latch forced from within, no fresh tracks marring the outer snow save those circling back to the house. "Curious," she murmured to herself, stooping closer. "In St. Mary Mead, we once had a poacher who left no prints because he never left the barn." The blizzard raged on, delaying the authorities. It was dawn before Inspector Dmitri Kozlov arrived, stamping snow from his boots, a bear of a man with a walrus moustache and a notebook scarred from use. "Murder, hey? In this house of nobles?" He eyed the group suspiciously, barking orders to his assistants. "Robbery, most likely. Thieves in the night." But as he examined the body, Miss Marple hovered nearby, her mild expression belying the whirl of thoughts. The dagger was no common blade. It bore the Petrov crest, likely from the study upstairs. And those footprints, too deliberate, too few. Human nature is a puzzle, she thought, but puzzles have edges that fit if one looks closely enough. As the inspector began his questions, the estate awoke to a day shrouded in suspicion. The snow, outside pristine, yet pregnant with secrets. Miss Marple returned to her knitting by the fire, her mind already threading the first clues into a tapestry that promised darker revelations ahead. Chapter 2. Shadows of Suspicion. The pale light of a February dawn filtered through the frost-etched windows of the Petrov estate, casting long, accusatory shadows across the polished floors. The household stirred uneasily, the air heavy with the metallic tang of blood that no amount of scrubbing could entirely erase from the drawing-room rug. Servants whispered in corners, their eyes wide with superstition, while the wind outside moaned like a grieving widow, piling fresh snow against the doors as if to seal in the secrets within. Miss Jane Marple, having risen early, as was her habit, sat primly in an armchair by the embers of the fire, her knitting needles clicking a steady rhythm that belied the whirl of her thoughts. She had seen death before, in the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead, where poison lurked in teacups and grudges festered like hidden thorns, but never amid such opulent isolation, where every glance seemed laced with calculation. Inspector Dmitri Kozlov had commandeered the study, transforming it into a makeshift interrogation chamber. His assistants, 2 young constables with notebooks at the ready, flanked him like sentinels as he summoned each member of the household one by one. His voice boomed through the closed door, blunt and unrelenting, probing alibis with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. First came Olga Petrovna, sweeping in with the hauteur of a displaced tsarina, her emeralds glinting coldly under the lamplight. "I was in my room all evening," she declared, her chin lifted defiantly. "A migraine, you see. Dreadful things brought on by my brother's incessant ranting about politics. I took a dose of laudanum and retired early. Ask the maid, she brought me hot water." Kozlov pressed her on the timing, his moustache twitching suspiciously. "And you heard nothing? No scream? No footsteps?" Olga's eyes flashed. "Nothing but the wind, Inspector. My room is at the far end of the hall." She departed with a rustle of silk, leaving a faint scent of lavender and something sharper. Resentment, perhaps. Next was Dr. Sergei Volkov, who entered with the measured stride of a man accustomed to crises, though his spectacles slipped slightly as he adjusted them. "I confess to a nocturnal stroll," he admitted, his voice steady, but his fingers drumming faintly on the armrest. "The gardens, you know. Fresh air clears the mind after heated debates. I saw the Count's footprints leading toward the conservatory, but I turned back before midnight. Kozlov leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. And why wander in a blizzard, Doctor? Revolutionary plotting, perhaps? Volkov's laugh was mirthless. Hardly! I'm a physician, not a bomb-thrower. Though I won't deny arguing with Ivan earlier. He dismissed my pleas for aid to the workers' clinics as sentimental nonsense. As he left, Miss Marple, who had positioned herself unobtrusively in the adjoining library, noted the slight tremor in his hand. Doctors, she reflected, were masters of subtlety. They knew how a drop too much in a vial could mimic fate itself. Natalia Kuznetsova followed, her youthful beauty marred by tear-streaked cheeks and trembling lips. She clutched a handkerchief like a talisman, collapsing into the chair as if her bones had turned to water. Uncle Ivan, he was like a father to me, she sobbed, though Kozlov's impassive stare prompted more. Through hiccups, she revealed a clandestine engagement to Harold Beaumont, one the Count had vehemently opposed. He said Harold was a fortune hunter, that I deserved a noble match. We met in secret last night, in the summer house, only for a moment to whisper promises. The inspector grunted, jotting notes. And after, you returned alone? Natalia nodded, her eyes downcast. Yes, straight to my room. I heard nothing until the scream. Miss Marple, overhearing fragments through the thin walls, thought of young Elsie back home, whose forbidden romance had led to a stolen locket and a web of lies. Love, she knew, could blind as effectively as any fog. Harold Beaumont was summoned next, his ruddy face glistening with sweat despite the chill. He mopped his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief. His joviality evaporated like morning mist. Ledgers, Inspector, that's all. I was in the library until late, reviewing accounts for my fur consignments. Siberian pelts don't ship themselves, you know. Kozlov produced the dagger for inspection, its hilt encrusted with the Petrov insignia. This is no thief's weapon, Mr. Beaumont. It's from this very house. Beaumont blanched. I swear I never touched it. My business with the Count was strictly above board, though he did haggle fiercely over prices. As he exited, muttering under his breath, Miss Marple observed the way his hands clenched, knuckles white. Men like him, she mused, often hid desperation behind bluster, much like the village grocer who embezzled to fund his gambling debts. Lady Evelyn Hargreaves, Countess Petrovna, entered last among the suspects, her composure cracking like thin ice. Pale and trembling, she vouched unprompted for Miss Marple's whereabouts. Jane was with me until bedtime. We chatted about old times. No one could suspect her. She's the soul of gentleness. Kozlov waved this aside, focusing on Evelyn's own movements. I retired early, exhausted from hosting. Ivan was still in the drawing room when I left. Her voice faltered, and she dabbed at her eyes. Who could do such a thing? A burglar, surely. The missing Fabergé egg proves it. The inspector harumphed, dismissing her with a curt nod. Miss Marple, sipping a fresh cup of tea Evelyn had brought her, murmured softly, People are the same everywhere, my dear. Greed, passion, vengeance. They weave patterns as intricate as this lace doily. Evelyn managed a weak smile, but her hands shook as she poured. With the interrogations concluded, the house settled into an uneasy hush, broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards or the distant toll of a church bell. Miss Marple wandered the corridors, her steps light and purposeful, examining the scene anew. The dagger, now impounded by Kozlov, had indeed come from the Count's private collection in the study, a relic of some ancestral duel, its blade honed to a wicked edge. No common intruder would have known its location, let alone bypass the locked cabinet without force. And the window in the drawing room? Its latch bore scratches from inside, as if pried open deliberately to invite the snow's deceptive blanket. Theatrical, Miss Marple whispered to herself, like staging a play to mislead the audience. But why not a quieter end, unless the killer wished to point fingers elsewhere? As the afternoon waned, a discovery stirred fresh turmoil. One of Kozlov's constables, rifling through the Count's desk drawers, unearthed a crumpled letter, its seal broken and ink smudged. "Read this," Kozlov barked, assembling the group in the salon. The missive, anonymous and scrawled in block letters, threatened to expose a smuggling scandal. Beaumont's furs, it claimed, concealed contraband, opium, perhaps, or revolutionary pamphlets, funneled through Siberian routes with the Count's unwitting complicity. "You'll be ruined," it warned, "unless you pay." Beaumont exploded in denial. "Lies, fabricated to blacken my name." But suspicion thickened like gathering clouds, eyes turning toward him with newfound wariness. Natalia edged away, her faith visibly shaken, while Volkov smirked faintly, as if relishing the bourgeois entanglement. Miss Marple pondered the letter's timing. Why surface now, unless planted to divert attention? She recalled a parallel in St. Mary Mead, a forged note that masked a domestic betrayal, leading to the unmasking of a jealous spouse. Layers upon layers, she thought, like onion skins hiding the core. Evening descended with a reluctant sun dipping below the horizon, painting the snow in hues of crimson that echoed the crime. Dinner was a sombre affair, the table set with mechanical precision but appetites absent. Candles flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced like conspirators. Dr. Volkov, perhaps seeking to break the pall, rose unsteadily with a glass raised. To Count Ivan Petrov, he intoned, his voice resonant yet edged with irony. "May his soul find peace in these turbulent times." His hand quivered as he drank, a droplet spilling like blood on the linen. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. Doctors understood toxins intimately, how they could fell a man without a mark. Yet this death had been anything but subtle, a dagger's thrust bold and declarative. Unless, she mused silently, the blade was but a flourish, concealing something slyer. As the meal concluded and the party dispersed into the night, a faint unease lingered, like the echo of footsteps in empty halls. Yes. Miss Marple retired to her room, but sleep was a distant companion. Outside, the snow fell ceaselessly, burying tracks and truths alike, while within, the shadows of suspicion deepened, promising revelations as cold and unforgiving as the Russian winter itself. Chapter 3. Whispers from the Past. The Petrov estate, shrouded in the relentless grip of winter, seemed to hold its breath as the investigation deepened, the snow outside muffling the world like a conspirator's hush. Miss Jane Marple, ever the unobtrusive observer, found herself drawn into quiet confidences with Lady Evelyn in the sunroom, where potted palms drooped under the weight of frost on the glass panes. Evelyn, her hands clasped tightly around a porcelain teacup, unburdened herself in low tones as if the walls themselves might eavesdrop. "You must understand the Petrov legacy, Jane," she began, her voice a fragile thread. "Ivan's father, the old Count, was a tyrant of the old school. Exiled his own brother to Siberia for dabbling in radical ideas. Whispers of treason, you see, back in the 80s. The brother vanished into the gulags, and the family fortune passed undivided to Ivan. But scars like that don't heal. They fester." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her knitting a soft counterpoint to Evelyn's revelations. Families carry such burdens, don't they? Like the Eltons in St. Mary Mead, their squabble over an aunt's will led to all sorts of unpleasantness. And Olga, she seems aggrieved. Evelyn sighed, glancing toward the door. Oh, yes. As Ivan's sister, she expected a generous portion, but the old count deemed her marriage to a minor noble unworthy, cutting her out save for a pittance. She's lived here on sufferance ever since. Her widowhood a convenient excuse to linger. Bitter, undoubtedly. And then there's Natalia, poor orphaned thing. Her parents perished in a carriage accident when she was 10. Ivan took her in as ward. She inherits the bulk upon marriage, but only if he approved the match. He was protective, to say the least. As Evelyn spoke, Miss Marple's mind catalogued the motives like entries in a parish register. Exile, breeding revenge, disinheritance, fueling envy, guardianship, masking control. And Dr. Volkov? She inquired mildly. Evelyn hesitated, her cheeks flushing. He's been attending even for a heart ailment these past months, prescribing digitalis to steady the rhythm. Ivan complained of palpitations, blamed the stresses of estate management. Sergei, Dr. Volkov, is principled, though his talk of reform rankles the nobility. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Principles, she knew, could cloak passions as effectively as a fur coat hid a dagger. Their tete-a-tete was interrupted by a commotion from the upper floors. Inspector Kozlov's voice booming like distant thunder. He descended the stairs, a bloodied glove dangling from his gloved hand like a macabre trophy. The household, assembled in the hall, faces a mosaic of alarm and curiosity. Found this in Mr. Beaumont's trunk, Kozlov announced, his eyes boring into the Englishman. Hidden beneath shirts, stained with what looks like fresh blood. Beaumont sputtered, his face turning the colour of boiled beetroot. Preposterous! I've been framed, I tell you. Enemies in the trade, rival fur merchants who'd stop at nothing to sabotage me. He extended his right hand demonstratively. See, I'm right-handed. That glove's for the left. Wouldn't fit my style at all. Miss Marple, stepping forward with deceptive timidity, requested a closer look. Kozlov obliged, holding it aloft. The glove was fine leather, monogrammed faintly with an IP. Ivan Petrov's initials. Blood crusted the cuff, but the fingers bore no tears, suggesting it had been worn briefly, perhaps in haste. Details are telling, she murmured to Evelyn later, as the group dispersed amid mutterings. Like the gardener's mitten in our village mystery. Wrong hand, wrong suspect. But who plants evidence, and why? To divert the hounds, of course. Emboldened by the find, Kozlov expanded his search, but Miss Marple preferred subtler paths. She donned her stout boots and ventured into the snow-blanketed conservatory, a glass house of wilted exotics where tropical dreams clashed with Russian reality. The air was humid, laced with the decay of overwatered ferns, and footprints, faint but discernible, crisscrossed the tiled floor, leading to a bench overlooking the frozen pond. There, amid discarded leaves, lay a cigarette butt, its paper yellowed and stamped with a Turkish crest. Miss Marple pocketed it discreetly, recalling Volkov's habit from dinner. The way he chain-smoked those imports during lulls in conversation. Habits betray us, she thought, as surely as the curate's pipe ash pinpointed him in the rectory theft. Returning indoors, she encountered Volkov himself in the corridor, his coat dusted with snow. "A brisk walk again, Doctor?" she asked innocently. He started, then composed himself with a wry smile. "Indeed, Miss Marple, the mind wanders better in the cold." Though I must confess, last night's argument with Ivan lingers. I pressed him for funds to support a clinic for the factory workers. He laughed it off as Bolshevik fantasy. His eyes held a fervent light, but Miss Marple detected no guile, only the zeal of a reformer. Yet zeal, she knew, could ignite into something fiercer, like the spark that set the miller's barn ablaze over a disputed boundary. As twilight encroached, painting the skies in bruised purples, the estate's tension simmered beneath a veneer of civility. Natalia sought Miss Marple in the library, her hands wringing a lace handkerchief. "Aunt Evelyn says you're wise in these matters. Uncle's death, it's unravelling everything. I overheard Olga berating him days ago about her allowance. She called him a miser, threatened to expose family secrets." Miss Marple patted the girl's arm. "Secrets have a way of surfacing, my dear, like crocuses through snow. What secrets precisely?" Natalia bit her lip. "Something about the exiled uncle. Rumours he fathered a child before vanishing. Olga hinted at claiming more inheritance, if proven." The conversation was cut short by a blood-curdling scream from upstairs, Natalia's own room. The household rushed to find the girl collapsed on the threshold, a crumpled note clutched in her fist. "You next, for what you know," it read in jagged script, the paper torn from a household ledger. Kozlov snatched it, barking for handwriting samples, while Beaumont hovered protectively, his arm around Natalia's shoulders. Olga sneered from the doorway. "Melodramatic, isn't it? Probably a servant's prank." Volkov administered a sedative, his touch lingering perhaps a moment too long on her wrist. Miss Marple examined the note later, under lamplight, ink fresh, letters disguised but with a feminine slant. "Warnings like this," she confided to Evelyn over cocoa in the quiet hours, "are double-edged. They frighten the victim, but reveal the sender's fear, like the anonymous letters in St. Mary Mead that unmask the sender's own guilt." Evelyn shuddered. "But who? And what does Natalia know?" Miss Marple's needles paused. "Perhaps more than she lets on, about alliances or affections misplaced." As the clock struck midnight, the estate fell into watchful silence, doors bolted against unseen threats. Miss Marple lay awake, piecing the fragments. Exiled kin, bitter siblings, guarded hearts, and a glove that didn't fit. The whispers from the past grew louder, echoing through the corridors like ghosts demanding reckoning. Outside, the wind sculpted the snow into eerie shapes, hiding trails that might lead to truth or deeper deception. In this frozen labyrinth, she sensed the killer's handiwork extending beyond one death, a web tightening with each revelation. Tomorrow, she resolved, would peel back another layer for human nature, unchanging as the seasons, always left clues for those patient enough to listen. Chapter 4. The Frozen Trail. The blizzard that had cloaked the Petrov estate in secrecy relented by mid-morning, revealing a sky of crystalline blue and a landscape transformed into a dazzling expanse of untouched snow. The air was sharp enough to cut, but the cessation of the storm allowed Inspector Dmitri Kozlov and his constables to extend their scrutiny beyond the manor's stifling walls. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in her woolen shawl, observed their efforts from the conservatory's frost-rimed windows, her knitting needles idle for once as she contemplated the shifting currents of suspicion within the household. The murder of Count Ivan Petrov had fractured the fragile civility of the estate, and each new clue seemed to deepen the mystery rather than unravel it, much like the tangled skeins of yarn she'd once sorted for the vicar's wife in St. Mary Mead. Kozlov, his boots crunching, purposefully, led a search of the grounds, his assistants fanning out like hounds on a scent. Miss Marple, declining an invitation to remain by the fire, donned her galoshes and followed at a discreet distance, her keen eyes scanning the snow for truths it might betray. Near the frozen pond, a discovery halted the inspector's stride. A silk scarf, its vibrant red stark against the ice, half submerged where the surface had cracked under some recent weight. Kozlov held it aloft, his voice carrying to the gathered household. "This belongs to Madame Petrovna, does it not?" Olga, summoned to the scene, flushed crimson beneath her furs. "Mine, yes, but stolen from my room days ago. I'd know that pattern anywhere. Ivan gave it to me last Christmas." Her indignation rang hollow, and Miss Marple noted the maid's hesitant nod when pressed. Olga had indeed been seen wearing it recently, contradicting her claim. The inspector's men traced footprints from the pond back toward the house, but Miss Marple, crouching with surprising agility for her years, studied them closely. "Curious," she murmured to Evelyn, who had joined her, shivering in a sable coat. "These prints are too shallow for a man's weight, even in boots. A woman's, perhaps, or a man taking care to tread lightly." She recalled a poacher in St. Mary Mead, who'd worn oversized shoes to mislead trackers, only to be caught by the peculiar spacing of his strides. Here, the prints looped erratically, as if staged to confuse. "Someone wishes us to look outward," she thought, "when the truth lies closer to home." Inside, the atmosphere grew taut as Kozlov's findings fueled fresh accusations. Beaumont, still smarting from the bloodied glove found in his trunk, cornered Miss Marple in the library, his voice low and urgent. "I've a telegram. Look here." He thrust a crumpled paper into her hands, its terse message sent from a St. Petersburg associate. "Petrov planned to expose your smuggling. Act fast or lose all." Beaumont's eyes were wild. "I swear, Miss Marple, I didn't kill him. Yes, my furs skirt customs, small potatoes, nothing worth murder. But Ivan was set to report me to the authorities, ruin my trade." His candor was disarming, yet Miss Marple's mind snagged on the timing. Why reveal this now, unless to deflect? Honesty can be a mask, she mused, thinking of the village butcher who'd confessed to minor thefts to hide a greater fraud. Dr. Volkov, meanwhile, faced renewed scrutiny. Kozlov, brandishing the Turkish cigarette butt Miss Marple had quietly passed to him, confronted the physician in the study. "You were in the conservatory, doctor, near the murder hour. Care to explain?" Volkov's spectacles glinted as he leaned back, his tone measured but strained. "I smoked there, yes, after my walk. The Count and I argued not just about clinics, but his refusal to fund medical research. He called me a dreamer, unfit for practical matters, but I didn't touch that dagger." His denial was firm, yet Miss Marple, lingering near the door, noted the faint sheen of sweat on his brow, reminiscent of the curate caught filching from the poor box. Guilt not of murder, perhaps, but of something concealed. Natalia, pale and withdrawn, offered a new thread during a tearful exchange with Miss Marple in the sunroom. "I overheard Olga in the drawing-room, days before. Before it happened," she whispered. "She was speaking to someone, low, urgent, about settling accounts with Uncle Ivan. I couldn't see who, but her voice was venomous." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind racing. "Voices carry motives, my dear, like echoes in a well. We must listen for what's not said." Natalia's revelation pointed to Olga, but the unseen conspirator intrigued her more, a shadow player in this grim drama. Kozlov, impatient for results, gathered the household in the salon to review the evidence. The scarf, the telegram, the cigarette butt. All pointed in different directions, yet none conclusively. He turned to Miss Marple, his scepticism softened by her quiet acuity. "You've seen such things before, madam. What say you?" She smiled demurely, folding her knitting. "In my village, Inspector, a stolen pie led to uncovering a blackmail scheme. The smallest clues, a footprint, a word, reveal the heart of the matter. Consider the window, opened from within, yet no thief's tracks lead away. This was no outsider's work." Her words hung in the air, stirring unease. Olga's lips tightened. Volkov adjusted his glasses, and Beaumont shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn, wringing her hands, ventured, "But the Fabergé egg! Surely a thief's prize!" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Or a distraction, my dear, like the missing silver spoon that masked a deeper theft at the vicarage." She declined to elaborate, but her mind churned. The egg's absence was too convenient, its stand undisturbed as if lifted with care, not snatched in panic. As evening descended, the household dined in strained silence, the clink of silver on china the only sound. Kozlov announced plans to detain Beaumont overnight, citing the glove and telegram as damning evidence. "You'll stay in the guest wing under guard," he declared, ignoring Beaumont's protests. Natalia stifled a sob, while Olga's smirk betrayed a flicker of satisfaction. Volkov excused himself early, pleading a headache, but Miss Marple caught the glance he exchanged with Evelyn. A fleeting, unguarded moment that spoke of intimacy, or perhaps complicity. Alone in her room, Miss Marple sat by the candlelight, her knitting a pretext for thought. The clues formed a pattern, incomplete but suggestive. The scarf planted to implicate Olga, the glove to doom Beaumont, the cigarette to ensnare Volkov. Yet the murder itself, the dagger's theatrical plunge, the staged window, pointed to a mind both cunning and desperate. "It's like the postmistress's scandal," she murmured, recalling a case where a forged letter hid a lover's betrayal. "The crime is dressed in another's clothes, but the heart of it beats close." Outside, the snow lay pristine, its surface unmarred save for the shallow prints by the pond. A frozen trail, leading not to answers, but to deeper questions. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the darkened gardens, where shadows moved like whispers of the past, urging her to peel back another layer of deception. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring the household closer to truth, or to a reckoning cloaked in the chill of Russian winter. Chapter 5. Revelations in the Library. The Petrov estate, bathed in the cold silver light of a waning moon, seemed to crouch beneath the weight of its secrets, the snow outside reflecting a deceptive calm. Within, the air crackled with unspoken accusations, each glance among the household a dart tipped with suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the library's high-backed chair, her knitting a mere prop for her restless mind, felt the threads of the mystery tightening like a noose. The murder of Count Ivan Petrov had woven a tapestry of deceit, false footprints, planted gloves, and whispered threats. And now, as the third day dawned, the pattern was beginning to emerge, as clear to her as the lacework she crafted in the quiet evenings of St. Mary Mead. Inspector Dmitri Kozlov, emboldened by the mounting evidence against Harold Beaumont, declared his intent to formally charge the Englishman. The bloodied glove, the damning telegram, and his admitted smuggling ventures formed a compelling case, and Kozlov's bear-like presence filled the salon with grim resolve. "You'll face trial in St. Petersburg," he growled, as Beaumont protested, his voice rising to a pitch of desperation. "This is madness! I'm no murderer, framed, I tell you!" Natalia, her eyes red-rimmed, clutched his arm. her loyalty wavering under the inspector's stern gaze. Olga Petrovna lounged in a corner, her lips curled in a faint predatory smile, while Dr. Volkov adjusted his spectacles nervously, his silence louder than words. Miss Marple, however, raised a gentle hand, her voice soft yet commanding attention. "Might I suggest, Inspector, that we gather once more in the library? There are inconsistencies worth exploring." Kozlov, though sceptical of this elderly Englishwoman's meddling, acquiesced, perhaps sensing the steel beneath her demure exterior. The household assembled amid the library's towering shelves, the scent of old leather and wax polish mingling with the faint chill seeping through the windows. A fire roared in the grate, casting flickering shadows that danced like spectres across the faces of the assembled. Miss Marple began, her tone as calm as a vicar's sermon. "In my village, a missing brooch once unravelled a tale of jealousy and deceit. Here, too, the clues point not to one truth, but to many, layered ones." She produced a small notebook, its pages filled with her neat script, and laid out a document, a page torn from Natalia's diary, discovered among the Count's papers. The handwriting matched the threatening letter accusing Beaumont of smuggling. "This was no anonymous note," Miss Marple said, her eyes resting on Natalia, who gasped, her cheeks flaming. "You wrote it, my dear, perhaps in a moment of passion. You loved Mr. Beaumont, but feared he'd betray you for wealth or freedom. A forged threat to shift suspicion, am I correct?" Natalia crumpled, tears spilling. "I only meant to frighten him, to keep him close. Uncle Ivan found it, threatened to disinherit me unless I broke the engagement. I never meant harm." Beaumont's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his gaze softening with pity rather than anger. Miss Marple nodded, her expression kind but unyielding. "Love makes us reckless, but not murderous. The letter was a distraction, not the heart of this crime." Turning to Dr. Volkov, she held up the Turkish cigarette butt, its paper now creased from handling. "You, Doctor, admitted to smoking in the conservatory, but your agitation suggests more. You supplied the dagger, didn't you? Not to kill, but to frame another. Perhaps the revolutionaries you championed to stir chaos?" Volkov's face drained of colour, his voice hoarse. I left it in the study, hoping it would be found, blamed on agitators. Ivan's death would rally support for reform, but I swear I didn't strike him." His confession hung in the air, a half-truth that thickened the web rather than untangled it. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Half-truths, she knew, were as dangerous as lies, like the half-confessed thefts of the village seamstress that masked her husband's infidelity. Olga, sensing the tide turning, laughed sharply. "Fools, all of you! Ivan deserved his fate, cutting my funds, treating me like a beggar in my own family's home. But I'm no killer. I'd rather see him squirm than bleed." Her defiance rang true, yet Miss Marple noted the tremor in her hands, the way her emerald rings caught the firelight like guilty winks. Resentment is a powerful motive, she thought, but Olga's pride would favor cunning over violence, like the widow in St. Mary Mead who spread rumors to ruin her rival. Miss Marple paced slowly, her steps deliberate. The footprints by the pond, too light, too staged, were meant to mislead, as was the open window. No thief entered that night. The snow tells no lies. The Fabergé egg's absence is a feint. It stand undisturbed, suggesting careful removal, not theft in panic. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. This was a crime of intimacy, planned to look like an outsider's work, but the dagger's thrust, too clean, too deep, suggests it came after death, a flourish to obscure the true method. Evelyn, pale and trembling, interjected. "But why stage? Such a scene? A burglar makes sense." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice held an edge. "Because, my dear, the killer needed chaos to hide their hand. The Count's heart condition, treated by Dr. Volkov, offered a subtler path. Digitalis, perhaps, in his evening tea. A fatal dose could mimic a natural end, but the dagger ensured suspicion fell elsewhere." Kozlov, frowning, produced a toxicology report rushed from the city. "No poison found, madam. The wound was fatal." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Precisely, Inspector. The absence of poison confirms the blade's role as deception. But who had access to his tea, his trust?" She turned to the household, her gaze lingering on each face. Beaumont, sweating despite the chill. Natalia, racked with guilt. Volkov, cornered by his own zeal. Olga, defiant yet brittle. And Evelyn, her hands twisting her shawl, her eyes avoiding Miss Marple's. "In St. Mary Mead," Miss Marple continued, "a forged will pointed to greed, but the true motive was love betrayed. Here, too, the heart betrays." She produced a tiny key, found tucked in the Count's desk, a key to the Fabergé egg's hidden compartment where love letters might hide. Someone feared exposure, not of smuggling or reform, but of a secret more personal. The room fell silent, the fires crackle a mocking echo. Kozlov, sensing the climax, leaned forward. "Speak plainly, Miss Marple. Who's the culprit?" She shook her head gently. "Not yet, Inspector. One piece remains, the hand that poured the tea, the mind that staged the scene. Let us reconvene tomorrow, when motives crystallize like frost." As the group dispersed, whispers trailing like smoke, Miss Marple retired to her room. Her knitting resumed, but her mind ablaze. The library's revelations had exposed fractures, jealousy, zeal, betrayal, but the final truth lurked just beyond her grasp, like a shadow in the snow. She thought of the village postmistress, whose love letters had unravelled a murder. Here, too, passion and deception intertwined. Outside, the moon cast its cold light over the estate, illuminating a trail that led not to the pond, but to the heart of the house itself. Chapter 6. The heart of the matter. The Petrov estate lay hushed under a mantle of fresh snow, the moon's pale glow casting an ethereal light through the frost-laced windows, as if the night itself held its breath for the truth to surface. Within, the tension was palpable, each creak of the ancient floors amplifying the unspoken dread that gripped the household. Miss Jane Marple, seated by her bedroom's small hearth, her knitting needles stilled, felt the mystery of Count Ivan Petrov's murder, resolving like a melody reaching its final chord. The clues, false footprints, a planted glove, a missing Fabergé egg and whispered betrayals, had woven an intricate web, but now, in the quiet hours of the fourth day, the strands were aligning. As clear to her as the patterns of human folly she'd unravelled in the sleepy lanes of St. Mary Mead. Inspector Dmitri Kozlov, his patience fraying like an old rope, convened the household in the grand salon at Miss Marple's request. The room, lit by chandeliers that glittered like frozen tears, held a sombre assembly. Harold Beaumont, his ruddy face etched with strain. Natalia Kuznetsova, her youthful beauty dimmed by fear. Olga Petrovna, her emerald-adorned fingers twitching with defiance. Dr. Sergei Volkov, his spectacles reflecting the candlelight like wary eyes. And Lady Evelyn, her composure a fragile veneer over trembling hands. Kozlov's moustache bristled as he addressed Miss Marple. "You've spun theories, madam, but I need a name. The evidence points to Beaumont, glove, telegram, motive, Speak, or we close this case." His tone was gruff, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of respect for the unassuming spinster whose insights had already upended his assumptions. Miss Marple rose, her small figure commanding the room with the quiet authority of truth. "In my village," she began, her voice gentle yet piercing, "a stolen hymn book once revealed a deeper sin, greed masked as piety. Here, too, the murder of Count Ivan is not what it seems. The dagger so dramatically plunged was a distraction, not the cause of death. I propose he was poisoned first, digitalis perhaps, in his evening tea, exploiting his known heart condition to mimic a natural end. The blade came later, a theatrical flourish to suggest a burglar's work." Kozlov interrupted, brandishing the toxicology report. "No poison, Miss Marple. The wound was fatal." She nodded, undeterred, her eyes twinkling with the clarity of revelation. "Exactly, Inspector. The absence of detectable poison suggests a dose just sufficient, administered by one who knew his medical history intimately. The dagger's role was to mislead, as was the open window forced from within, with snow blown in to confuse the timeline. No thief's tracks led away. The snow, like a village gossip, tells only truth." She turned to the assembled, her gaze sweeping each face like a lantern in a storm. "Let us consider motives. Mr. Beaumont stood to lose his trade if the Count exposed his smuggling. Yet his candour about the telegram suggests panic, not guile, like the shopkeeper in St. Mary Mead, who confessed to pilfering to avoid worse accusations." Beaumont shifted, relief mingling with dread in his eyes. Miss Natalia, driven by love, forged a letter to bind her lover, but her tears betray no killer's heart. Olga, embittered by disinheritance, might scheme, but her pride favours words over blood, much like the widow who poisoned reputations, not lives. Olga's lips parted in protest, but Miss Marple pressed on, her voice soft as falling snow. "Dr. Volkov, your zeal for reform led you to plant the dagger, hoping to pin blame on revolutionaries. A dangerous game, but not murder." Volkov's shoulders sagged, his confession from the library still raw. "The Fabergé egg's absence," she continued, producing the tiny key she'd found, "was no theft, but a calculated removal, its compartment hiding something worth killing for, not jewels, but secrets." She paused, her eyes settling on Lady Evelyn, whose hands clutched her shawl like a lifeline. "Evelyn, my dear, you've played the gracious hostess, but your heart betrays you. The Count discovered your affair with Dr. Volkov. Letters perhaps concealed in that egg, written in a moment of passion. Ivan's threat to expose you would ruin not just your reputation but your freedom. You knew his heart condition, had access to his tea, and the skill to stage a crime. The dagger thrust post-mortem was your flourish, the glove planted to doom Beaumont, the window opened to suggest an intruder. Like the postmistress in my village who forged notes to hide her lover's shame, you wove a deception to protect your own." Evelyn's face crumpled, a sob escaping as she sank into a chair. "He was cruel, Jane, cruel! Sergei and I, we only wanted happiness. Ivan found the letters, threatened to lock me away, to disgrace us both. I slipped digitalis into his tea, just enough, I thought, to weaken him. But he died, and I panicked. The dagger, the snow, it was to cover my tracks." Volkov lunged forward, his voice breaking. "Evelyn, no! I urged her to flee, not to kill. I'm complicit only in love." Kozlov, his notebook forgotten, signalled his constables. "Countess Petrovna, you're under arrest. Dr. Volkov, you'll answer as an accessory." The room erupted in gasps, Natalia clinging to Beaumont, Olga's smirk fading into shock. Miss Marple remained serene. Her knitting resumed as if the confession were a mere stitch in her pattern. "Human nature," she said softly to Kozlov as Evelyn was led away, "is the same in St. Petersburg as in St. Mary Mead. Love, fear, desperation, they drive us to terrible acts, but they leave traces for those who look." As the household dispersed, the salon's grandeur seemed diminished, its opulence mocked by the raw truth of betrayal. Kozlov, gruff but chastened, shook Miss Marple's hand. "You've a mind like a steel trap, madam. We'd have hanged the wrong man." She smiled faintly. "The heart of the matter, Inspector, lies in listening, not just to words, but to what's unsaid." Later, alone in her room, Miss Marple gazed out at the snow-covered gardens, where the moon illuminated a world cleansed of its secrets. The Fabergé egg, recovered from Evelyn's locked trunk, lay on the inspector's table, its hidden compartment empty now, the letters burned to ash. The case was closed, but the echoes of passion and deceit lingered, like footprints faintly visible before the next snowfall erased them. She thought of a similar case, a village doctor's wife, undone by a hidden love, and sighed. "Cities or hamlets," she murmured. "The heart beats the same, and its missteps are ever predictable." The night deepened, the estate silent save for the wind's low lament. Miss Marple packed her knitting, her work here done, but her mind already turning to the journey home, where new puzzles, no doubt, awaited her quiet genius. Chapter 7. Echoes in the snow. The Petrov estate, stripped of its secrets, lay silent under a sky heavy with the promise of new snow, its grandeur dimmed by the raw truth of betrayal. The arrest of Lady Evelyn Hargreaves and Dr. Sergei Volkov had left the household in a state of stunned quietude, as if the very walls exhaled relief mingled with sorrow. Miss Jane Marple, her carpet-bag packed and her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, stood by the window of her guest-room, gazing out at the frozen gardens where moonlight carved fleeting patterns in the drifts. The resolution of Count Ivan Petrov's murder had unfolded like a village drama in St. Mary Mead, passion, deceit, and desperation laid bare. But here, amid the opulence of a Russian manor, the stakes had felt grander, the echoes deeper. Yet, as she often remarked, human nature remained as predictable as the seasons, whether under thatched roofs or gilded domes. The morning after the confessions, the estate stirred with a subdued energy. Inspector Dmitri Kozlov, his notebook now filled with Evelyn's tearful admission, and Volkov's reluctant corroboration, prepared to escort the pair to St. Petersburg for trial. The Fabergé egg retrieved from Evelyn's locked trunk sat on the inspector's makeshift desk in the study, its jeweled surface winking in the lamplight, its hidden compartment empty of the letters that had sparked such fatal desperation. Miss Marple, invited to inspect it one last time, noted the craftsmanship, a marvel of art concealing a chamber of secrets. Much like people, she mused to herself, beautiful shells hiding troubled hearts. In the drawing-room, the remaining household gathered for a final farewell before Miss Marple's departure. Natalia Kuznetsova, her eyes still shadowed but her posture steadier, clung to Harold Beaumont's arm, their engagement now free of the Count's veto. "You've saved us, Miss Marple," she said softly, her voice trembling with gratitude. "I thought Harold would be lost to me, branded a murderer." Beaumont, his ruddy face softened by relief, clasped Miss Marple's hand. "I'm no saint, mind you. My business treads murky waters, but I'd never stoop to murder. You saw through the fog, madam." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. In St. Mary Mead, a merchant once hid stolen goods behind a jovial grin. Truth, Mr. Beaumont, has a way of surfacing, like ice breaking on a spring river. Olga Petrovna, now poised to claim a larger share of the estate as the Count's nearest kin, stood apart, her emerald rings catching the firelight like cold stars. Her sharp tongue was, tempered, but her gaze held a grudging respect. "You've a knack for meddling, Miss Marple," she said, her voice dry as winter air. "I'd have let Beaumont swing, but I suppose justice is better served this way." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Justice, Madame Petrovna, is a mirror. It reflects what we wish to hide. Your resentment was clear, but not your hand in blood." Olga's lips twitched, a flicker of acknowledgement before she turned to confer with the estate steward about her newfound inheritance. Inspector Kozlov, his bear-like frame filling the doorway, approached Miss Marple with a rare deference. "I underestimated you, madam," he admitted, his moustache twitching. "Thought you a meddlesome spinster, but you've a mind sharper than my sabre. Without you, we'd have missed the poison for the blade." Miss Marple waved a hand dismissively. "In my village, Inspector, a misplaced teacup once solved a theft. Small things speak loudly to those who listen." She handed him a neatly folded list of observations, notes on footprints, glances, and the timing of tea service that had guided her deductions. Kozlov tucked it into his coat, muttering about English women and their uncanny ways. As the sleigh was readied for her journey back to the Finland station, Miss Marple took a final walk through the estate's snow-laden gardens, her boots sinking softly into the drifts. The pond, where Olga's scarf had been found, gleamed under a fresh layer of ice, its secrets now as still as the Count's heart. She paused by the conservatory, where Volkov's cigarette butt had hinted at his restless presence, and reflected on the layers of deception she'd peeled away. Evelyn's affair, born of a loveless marriage, had driven her to poison. Volkov's complicity, though not murderous, had deepened the crime's shadow. "Love," she murmured, "is a dangerous spark, like a candle left burning in a draughty room." The household's farewells were brief but heartfelt. Natalia pressed a small icon into Miss Marple's hands. A saint's image, its gold frame worn but warm. "For protection on your journey," she whispered. Beaumont offered a bluff nod, promising to reform his trade, while Olga merely raised a glass of vodka in silent salute. Kozlov, overseeing the loading of Evelyn and Volkov into a guarded sleigh, tipped his cap. "Safe travels, Miss Marple. Russia could use more like you." She smiled faintly, climbing into her own sleigh, the bells jingling like a faint echo of the case's resolution. As the horses trotted toward the city, St. Petersburg's spires rose against the horizon, their golden tips catching the weak winter sun. Miss Marple leaned back, her thoughts drifting to the parallels with her village mysteries. The baker's wife, whose jealousy poisoned a rival's tea. The curate, whose stolen glances betrayed a hidden sin. "Cities or hamlets," she said softly to herself. "The heart's missteps leave tracks, and snow, like gossip, preserves them for a time." The Orient Express awaited, its steam curling into the frosty air, promising a return to the familiar rhythms of England. Yet she knew, with a quiet certainty, that new puzzles would find her, as inevitable as the turning of seasons. The train's whistle pierced the silence, and as St. Petersburg faded into a blur of white, Miss Marple opened her knitting bag, her needles resuming their steady click. The case was closed, its echoes fading like footprints in fresh snow, but the lessons lingered, love's desperation, pride's bitterness, and the quiet power of observation. In her mind's eye, she saw Evelyn's tear-streaked face, Volkov's fervent gaze, and the Count's lifeless form, a tableau of human frailty as timeless as the Russian winter. We are all frail, she thought, but truth, like a needle, stitches us back to order. As the sleigh reached the station, she glanced back once, the estate a distant silhouette against the endless white. The snow would fall again, erasing all traces, but Miss Marple carried the story within her. A thread to weave into the next tapestry of human nature she was certain to encounter.